The vase arrived on a Tuesday, wrapped in layers of cream-colored paper and tied with a red silk ribbon. Lorna traced her finger along the delicate blue and white porcelain, admiring the intricate patterns of sampaguita flowers that wound their way up its considerable height. At nearly 6 feet tall, it dominated the entryway of their new home in Quezon City. "Who did you say this was from again?" Patrick called from the kitchen, where he was sorting through their other wedding presents. "There wasn't a card," Lorna replied, tilting her head to study the craftsmanship. "Just a note saying it's an antique from Manila. Must be from one of your relatives from Batangas." Patrick appeared beside her, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Not that I know of. Mum would have mentioned something this." Substantial, he rapped his knuckles gently against the ceramic surface. The sound that echoed back was deeper than expected, hollow and resonant like a church bell. That night, Lorna dreamed of a woman in a traditional terno. She stood in their entryway, her back to Lorna, one hand resting on the vase's rim. Her hair was styled in perfect waves, typical of the 1940s. When she turned, Lorna saw that her face was gaunt, cheekbones sharp enough to cast shadows, and her eyes held an emptiness that made Lorna's chest tighten. Lorna woke with a start, her nightgown damp with sweat. Beside her, Patrick slept soundly, but something pulled her from the warmth of their bed. The hardwood floors were cold beneath her feet as she padded to the entryway. The vase stood silent in the moonlight. Lorna could have sworn she saw movement reflected in its glossy surface, like ripples in a pond. Over the next days, strange things began to happen. Food disappeared from their kitchen overnight, not just leftovers, but raw ingredients: uncooked rice, dried mungo beans, fresh mangoes. The house felt colder, especially near the vase, and their electricity bill skyrocketed despite the mild weather. Lorna started finding white rice scattered across the floor every morning, forming patterns that looked almost like Bebean characters, but when she tried to photograph them, her phone camera would blur or shut down. A week after the Vassi's arrival, their elderly neighbour Ailing Nina came over to welcome them to the neighbourhood. The moment she stepped into the entryway, her warm smile vanished. She whispered, making the sign of the cross. "Where did you get this?" Lorna explained about the anonymous wedding gift. Ailing Nina's face grew grave. "This is very old," she said, her voice trembling. "From the wartime. Japanese occupation, she wouldn't step any closer to it, keeping her body angled away." There were many stories. Terrible stories. Young women who disappeared. Some say the soldiers would. She stopped, pressing her lips together and clutching her rosary. That night, Lorna dreamed again of the woman in the terno. This time she was crying, tears falling like pearls onto the floor. She opened her mouth to speak, and water poured out, along with grains of rice. Behind her, the vase seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Lorna began researching. She learned about multi-spirits of those who died violent deaths, trapped between worlds. She read about the Japanese occupation of the Philippines, about the atrocities committed, about young women who vanished without a trace. The dreams intensified. The woman tried to speak, but could only produce the sound of water and choking. Lorna would wake up tasting rice and salt water. Patrick thought she was being paranoid until the night they both heard it, a soft sobbing coming from the entryway, followed by the distinct sound of someone eating, desperate and animal-like. When they investigated, they found nothing but scattered grains of rice and puddles of water that seemed to evaporate as they watched. Finally, after another vision of the woman, Lorna understood. The ghost was trying to tell her story. She had been a young teacher in Manila, 1944. Japanese soldiers had taken her from her classroom. When she resisted, they forced her into a large porcelain vase not unlike the one in their entryway and left her there. No one heard her screams. No one came to help. "We have to help her," Lorna told Patrick. "She's trapped. She's been trapped for so long." Ailing Nina helped them find an albulario in Quiapo. The old healer listened to their story without surprise, nodding slowly. She explained that restless spirits could be appeased, their souls guided to rest through proper rituals and prayers. They brought the vase to the albulario's house on the night of the full moon. She prepared an altar with candles, food offerings, and prayers to Santa Nino. As she chanted ancient oraciones, Lorna saw the woman one last time standing beside the vase, her form more solid than in any dream. The ghost bowed deeply to Lorna, her face peaceful now. When she straightened, her cheekbones were no longer sharp with hunger, and her eyes held warmth instead of emptiness. She smiled, touching her hand to her heart, then to her lips a gesture of gratitude for being heard, for being remembered. The albulario's chanting reached a crescendo. The woman's form began to fade, not into darkness but into light. The vase cracked with a sound like distant thunder, a clean break from rim to base. Inside, they found a single mother-of-pearl hair clip, tarnished with age, and a scrap of cream-coloured fabric. Al and Nina helped them research historical records. They eventually found her name Maria Clara Santos, age 23, listed among the missing persons from 1944. They had her name added to the memorial wall at the Shrine of Freedom in Pinaglabanan, but their peace was short-lived. 3 months later, Lorna woke in the middle of the night to find Patrick's side of the bed empty. Following the sound of whispers, she made her way to their storage room where they'd kept the broken vase, planning to donate it to a war museum. There was Patrick, kneeling before the reassembled vase, the crack somehow sealed as if it had never been broken. His eyes were glassy, unseeing, as he spoke in a woman's voice, "Thank you for freeing me, but I was so lonely. I needed a companion. Now I have one." When he turned to Lorna, his face flickered for a moment, revealing Maria Clara's gaunt features superimposed over his own. The vase began to fill with water, rising slowly, inexorably, as Patrick stood and walked toward it with jerky, puppet-like movements. "Join us," he said in that terrible double voice. The water's fine behind him, in the vase's reflection. Lorna saw not one figure, but dozens, all the lost souls who had found their way into the vase over the decades. And now it hungered for more.